first touch, feel our bodies drifting up. I don't know how to be around you. I'm just trying to lose myself. I know that I just can't trust you, but you love me like no one else.
Tips for dealing with the bank. So perhaps you're renting in a property where it is run by a body corporate.
Understanding the basic calculation, income minus expenses, and you want to be left with a positive income.
It is a very tough game. It's not easy at all.
To stay ahead of knowing exactly what your clients need, what their teething issues are.
Have a joint move-in inspection.
That a lot of people that are coming into sectional title homeowners associations are, just like you described, not only first-time homeowners, but first-time owners and residents in community schemes.
They get to see the perspective from the other side of the aisle. And I think that's a really important thing to do.
It's a market that's estimated to be transacting at least 9 billion rand per year. So it's a huge market.
In order to get there, you need to be able to build up a track record.
Your cash flow model needs to be sharp.
A quote comes to mind. The best time to buy a property was about 10 years ago. The next best time is now.
Good evening and welcome to episode 73 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama Khumalo. It's a Friday edition of the show. It is, of course, the end of the week. I hope that it means something to some of us. I know so many of us can't even tell what day of the week it is, especially a Friday. You know, a day that used to be one of those days where you look forward to the weekend, but now it really doesn't mean much because so many of us are, of course, stuck in our homes. Well, it is, of course, a Private Property Podcast where we bring you the latest in all things that have to do with property. And this evening, we're going to be looking at some of the costs associated with buying your first property. Going to be speaking to two brothers. This is Lebo and Neo Nong, who are the co-founders of Nong Wealth, and really going through some of the costs that you need to be mindful of when you're buying your first property. I certainly know that a lot of new buyers are likely going to be entering the property space, seeing as we're facing historically low interest rate cuts. I'm sure that a lot of people have also found a bit of relief in yesterday's interest rate cuts and are thinking of entering the property market. And this is, of course, one of those things that you always have to be mindful of, the various costs that are associated with you when you buy that first property. Lebo, Neo, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
No, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I mean, when we got the invitation, rather, we were so excited to be on the show and to the listeners. So now we are about giving value to the listeners and them actually having something to take back home.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I mean, when it involves property investing or property as a whole, we are there. So we're happy to be here.
So the Nong brothers are there when it comes to property. Well, James, I think both of you are very young, so they're millennials just like myself. And it's always interesting to talk to property to millennials, because a lot of us, want to get into the property space, certainly want to use whatever expertise that we may have picked up along the way, whether it's in our careers or perhaps even in school, and apply it in how we, start our property portfolio and grow our property portfolio. But of course, one of the things that we need to always be mindful of are the costs that are associated with home ownership. So perhaps, to the Nong brothers, let's start with, one of the first big costs that a first-time home buyer needs to be aware of as they are about to embark on buying their first property.
I mean, just to give you a bit of perspective, we are property investors. So now when we invest in properties, we make profit when we actually buy. So now there are things that you actually need to know in terms of buying a property before you actually buy a particular property. So now what we find most customers, okay, we do get customers that say, guys, you know what, I'm just looking at buying a home. I just want to buy a home. I'm not looking into investing. But now they see a property on Property 24 or private property. And then what happens is that they say, okay, this house is going to cost me 1 million. I just have a down payment of around 10%, and then that's it, right? But now the most important one, I think, that we usually forget is the transfer costs that you actually incur when you actually buy it. So now what are transfer costs? Transfer costs are when you're actually going to buy a property, and then if you are going to take it via bond, you have a bond registration that you have to actually pay, and you also have your transfer costs that you actually need to incur. So now those are the things that you actually have to look out for before you actually buy a property. That do you have the transfer costs, and do you have the down payment that you're actually going to use to give to the particular bank?
I mean, especially for a first-time buyer, I remember for the first time when we paid, the first time we actually paid, we got a call from the lawyers, the bond attorneys. So they called us and they were like, guys, you have to pay this amount. And then because we, as Lebo did mention, we ran our numbers before we actually buy the property. So we were so excited when it was just a fraction of that amount that we estimated, only to find out that we got another call. We got another
all too well. Yes, now you're saying, and then you got another call from the conveyancers, right? Now these are the transferring attorneys.
We first started with the transfer attorneys. We paid them off, and then we were like, yes, we were able to cut off half our bill. Only to find out that the bond registration attorneys called 1 week later, once we have celebrated, and then they told us that, guys, you need to actually pay for your bond registration. So now that was something that we actually needed to take into consideration before we bought other properties.
And Lebo and Neo, I think, and I've even confessed this to our viewers at home, as you were starting to talk about lawyers and getting that first call, I knew exactly where you were going, because I know this one all too well. Because when you're a first-time buyer, you think, look, I have to save for the deposit. I know that there are attorneys that are involved somewhere there. So maybe that attorney fee might be, let's say, 15 or 20K, and that's it. So you've got that money, you're ready, and you're thinking, look, I'm set. And then, of course, that second call comes in. And I'm sure a lot of the regular viewers have certainly heard me tell this story, that when I bought, I made the mistake, or perhaps it wasn't so much a mistake. So I bought 2 properties at the first time, once off. And so the first, invoice comes from the attorney. I was expecting that, it's fine. The second invoice comes, I'm expecting that, it's fine, because I think, it's 2 properties. Of course, I'm going to get 2 invoices. Then the moment the third one comes in, a part of me thought, wait, did somebody get my email address? Am I being scammed? What's going on here? The fourth one comes in, and I think, wait, this can't be right. Where are people getting my email address? So I think, the attorney cost is certainly one of those things that you underestimate. And when you don't know that you've got your bond registration attorney as well as your transferring attorney, and you don't budget accordingly, it's certainly something that can, eat into your savings if you've got savings. And sometimes you simply just don't have savings. So you might perhaps even be thinking, let me take out a personal loan, which of course you don't want to have to do. But if you're not adequately equipped with the information and knowing that, look, this is a cost you need to be mindful of, and you need to budget for it, so that come when you're ready for, buying that property, you've got it ready, and you're going to be able to pay the lawyers. So to the Nong brothers, what are the, fee figures should we be looking out for? I think the attorney one, we're certainly now clear. There are going to be 2 attorneys if you're going to buy a bonded property, as opposed to if you're going to be buying it cash, that you need to be saving up for. And oftentimes you're probably looking at anything between 15 to 20,000, sometimes slightly less, sometimes certainly more. It does vary depending on how much the property that you're purchasing is. And you can, of course, check online on www.privateproperty.co.za. You're able to input what the purchase price is. It will give you a nice breakdown of what you can potentially estimate those attorney fees to be. So, gents, what other costs should we be mindful of? We now know that at least there are 2 lawyers we're going to be paying, because we're going to be getting bank finance. We're not going to make that mistake. We're going to find out how much, or roughly how much it's going to cost us. What are some of the things that we certainly need to be mindful of when we're buying that first property?
I mean, that was just the first jab. The second jab is still coming now. The second jab is coming. So the second jab came through, like what happens is that we knew that we have to capitalize on getting experts around us. So how was that going to happen? We had a bond originator that we specifically spoke to and who looked at us as individuals. So that worked out well. So they were like, you know what, guys, your credit score is actually well. This is the bond that you're actually sitting at. You just need to put in so much of deposit. And then with the guys that we bought, because we bought it through SA Home Loans. So now with what they sent, they were like, okay, guys, the deposit that you need to put in was slightly more as a percentage. But now when we're dealing with numbers of buying a house, that 5% in opposed to 10% is quite a lot. So now if we didn't know, we're like, okay, let's just pay the 10% that the SA Home Loan guys were speaking about, because they were not connected with our bond originator. They were like, gents, this is how much that you need to pay. Whereas we spoke to our bond originator and she was like, no, guys, you actually qualified for this. Just talk to them that your bank actually approved you for this amount instead of that 5%. So at least even with that, that was like the second jab that almost came through. And we're like, what? Again, this can't be true. So
now I think just to add on what Neo was saying is that when you're actually going to buy your property, don't actually go to one bank and say that I'm looking for a loan and please offer me this loan. Contact the bond originator so that they can actually go and actually file in your application for your loans to actually get the lowest possible interest rates, the best deal, rather. So now, before actually going into a deal, just make sure that you went through your bond originator, and then they will actually tell you how much you actually qualify for. Because I think most of the time what happens is that someone sees the house and they're like, ooh, I love this house. But now you do have a good credit score, but now you won't be able to apply for that particular house because the price of the house is too high. So now, once you have actually contact your bond originator, they'll be able to tell you that, okay, you can look at houses between this amount of money. Say, for instance, your ceiling would be around 800,000. So now you can look at houses from anywhere until 800,000. And then they will be able to actually apply to different banks and actually get you the best possible loan.
And Lebo, that is something that we actually take for granted. And it's certainly one of the things that we like emphasizing right here on the Private Property Podcast is the importance of working with a bond originator, especially as a first-time home buyer, because oftentimes you might not even know how to best negotiate with the different financial institutions. You certainly might not be able to shop around for better interest rates with the different financial institutions. So having that bond originator who's able to do quite a bit of the work for you, from pre-qualifying you and you getting a good sense of how much exactly do you qualify for. So you already know that I only qualify for 800,000 Rand, so I mustn't go looking at properties that are 1.2 million because you're simply not going to get that bank financing. To, contacting, of course, the different banks to, get the best deal for you. And then being able to also, have the banks fight for your business, because I think that's also something that I think a lot of first-time home buyers sometimes don't get, that the first grant or the first quote, rather, that comes in is not necessarily the one that you should go with. So see what the other banks are going to offer you, sit down, see whether you're happy with what's on offer. If one is offering you, 0.25% less, go to the other one and say, better this offer, see whether they can go just slightly less than that. And by the time, the banks are now done trying to fight over you and you're happy that, look, I've actually got prime, or I've got prime minus 0.25 or prime minus 1, then you can say, look, this is a bank that I'm going to go with, because we underestimate how much a 0.25% difference actually makes. But when you sit down and you look at the numbers of how much that makes over a 20-year period, you save quite a substantial amount of money. So it actually is worth that extra bit of admin and going back and forth. And even if it takes you just a couple of more days, it's fine. You've already got the quotes. So you already know that, look, the bank has an appetite for extending that credit facility to you. So you don't need to be scared that you're going to lose out or they're suddenly going to change their minds. Because I can imagine, Lebo and Neo, that there's quite a bit of fear that goes into buying that first property, wouldn't you say?
Yes, it goes without saying. I mean, we always see this with the network that we have. Like, we started a network in terms of property investing, so it's quite cool because you get like old people that are coming through and like, gents, if you guys are actually doing it, tell us, motivate us. How can we actually get that confidence that you guys have? And as I mentioned, that we want to capitalize, we want to work with experts. So if we know that there's an accountant within property that deals with property investors, we need that guy on our team. If we know that we have these construction guys that come highly recommended, we need these guys in our team so that we can capitalize on all of their knowledge and experience.
And I'm sure one of your viewers are saying, bond originator, that means I need to pay someone else. No, guys, you don't have to actually pay your bond originator. So now your bond originator gets paid by your particular bank. So now what your bond originator will actually do is to gather your documents and then send them out to the banks. So now the banks will actually deal with the bond originator. So now you don't have to actually pay the bond originator.
And I actually like working with bond originators. And I've bought quite a couple of properties from, that first transaction. And a lot of them were bought using a bond originator. I mean, you're certainly able to speak directly with your bank and have that conversation, which can also be beneficial. Sometimes speak even directly to some of the banks. But I think we sometimes underestimate how by the time you're probably a slightly more seasoned investor, or you have a portfolio and you're able to make a business case, you've been working with bond originators for a bit. And only at that stage where even your portfolio is looking more and more like a business, are you then able to actually approach a bank and say, well, this is a very well geared investment or portfolio rather, and this is how I want to leverage off of it. Then that's a different ball game altogether. But of course, that's not where we start. A lot of us certainly start with that first property and wanting to, maximize every single rand that we make, but also wanting our rands to stretch just a little bit, because I think we underestimate the different ways we can sort of save money in that first time home buying journey. And that's something that I actually want us to talk about, James, when we come back from the break, is the different ways that we can then save money. I mean, we certainly know that there are certain financial things we must be mindful of. We've explored the attorney one that all three of us have had to encounter, and I'm sure many viewers at home have also had to encounter that one. And there are certainly certain ways that you are able to save money even as you are dealing with attorneys. We're going to go for a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be taking your questions and comments at home and looking at some of those ways that you can best save money along your first time home ownership journey. We'll be back just after this. Welcome back to episode 73 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama Kumalo. This evening, I'm joined by Lebo Nong and Neo Nong, who are the co-founders of Nong Wealth, two property brothers. And we're talking about things to be mindful of, or rather the costs to be mindful of when you're buying your first property. So if you're a first-time home buyer or about to embark on your first-time home buying journey, this is certainly one of those things that you do not want to miss out on. I'm sure quite a number of people are going to want to take advantage of the lower interest rates and are probably exploring, buying that first property because perhaps now they might be able to qualify for it, or now they've certainly got an appetite for it. I think the low interest rates have given us a good opportunity to pay off a lot of our other kinds of debt, and perhaps you have now, finished paying off that debt. You've got a little bit of saving that you've managed to save up over the past last couple of months during lockdown, and you're now thinking, look, the next step for me is certainly buying that first property, and you're trying to explore different ways and running your numbers and doing your research in terms of how to go about doing that. Now, Lebo, I mean, one of the things, of course, is we've spoken about the lower cost. We've certainly spoken about the importance of working with the bond originator in getting the best deal, because the difference between, 0.25% is quite substantial when you look at it, from a long-term perspective. Perhaps let's look at some of the ways that you can then sort of save costs when you're buying your property for the first time, because there are, of course, different ways that you can go about saving costs along the journey.
I mean, saving costs along from your journey, it depends on looking at it from which perspective or which lens, if one should say. For instance, if I would be talking with somebody and they were like, I want to buy into new development. I want to buy into new development. And do you think that, okay, I won't be paying so much on transfers because let's say there was no previous owner. So if I'm buying it on a personal capacity, I'm going to live there and I love that place. It's quite interesting. It's quite strategic. I love what you mentioned there when you talked about property investing as a business. You talked about property investing as a business. So this is what we always emphasize on. So now if it's property investing as a business, however, the numbers don't actually add out and I'm saving on transfers, it's not a deal that I'd rather go into, even though I won't be paying that transfer. So you need to know your numbers thoroughly so on the transfers. I mean, another way that our viewers can actually go about saving in terms of your money is that you can actually negotiate the amount that you're actually going to buy the house for. So now what we find a lot of times, this is what happens, right? You see a property on private property and it's listed for around 1.5 million. And then you say, it's the price that it's listed for. So now I'll just give them that 1.5 million. Not knowing that you can actually try and negotiate it down. So now this is not, the negotiation part is the most, I think it's a little bit tricky because now not everybody can negotiate. I think now we came to realize that, because now some people just come to your property and say, yeah, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. I want to buy it at 1 million. So now that's not actually negotiating. Negotiating is actually trying to find that balance between the buyer and the seller. So now you can actually negotiate the price that you're actually going to buy the house at. But now when you're also negotiating, just be mindful of, if that was to happen to you and someone was going to negotiate you in that approach, would you be willing to sell that particular property?
So then, Lebo, how do we go about negotiating? I mean, I always share with the listeners that I'm quite a bullish negotiator, and have been able to sharpen that skill quite well. But how do viewers at home, certainly who are starting off on their home ownership journey, what tips would you give them when it comes to negotiation? Because as you're saying, it's certainly not a skill that all of us have, and it is a skill that you essentially have to work on. So you also can't take it that people will automatically know how to negotiate for a better price the moment they do a viewing. Sometimes it might, take you having a conversation with a friend and bouncing how you're going to go about even negotiating for that better price. Perhaps share with us, tips for us to negotiate better, especially as first-time home buyers. I mean, you're already going to be so intimidated along the journey. You're going to be dealing with, agents who know what they're talking about, going to be dealing with lawyers. You're going to be getting quite a lot of big and long documents with jargon that you don't necessarily understand. And now there's the case of having to negotiate for that purchase price. Because as you rightfully say, that, a property is not like walking into a Woolworths and buying a loaf of bread. It could be listed, the loaf of bread might be 10 Rand, but you don't negotiate it when you walk into a Woolworths. Whereas with property, we almost know that as a standard, we negotiate the price. So, Lebo, what tips would you then give us when it comes to negotiating that purchase price?
I think first is your posture. I'm joking. I think in terms of us, how we actually go about negotiating is that we buy distressed properties. So now we go into the market and see that, okay, which properties are actually distressed and how much is it going to actually cost us to fix the whole place up. So now what we then do is that we go in with our contractor and tell them that, okay, this is the house that we're actually going to buy. And if we were to actually renovate this whole house in the worst case possible, how much would we actually spend? And then we'd actually sit down with the property owner and then
not property owner per se, but now with the estate agent, depending, because one case differs from the next. Sometimes you do deal with property owners and sometimes you do deal with estate agents. We tell them that, okay, I'm looking at this particular property, and as a property investor, I'm willing to help you, but now remember, I also need to make a profit. So now, looking at how much I'm actually going to spend in this particular house, it would be most profitable for me to buy it at this particular price point. So now, say for instance, we're looking at the 1.5 million. So now the renovation and everything would actually cost around 300,000. So now the profit that I'm looking at is around 15%, for example, right? So now this is a conversation that I'd rather have with my estate agent. I know sometimes, even for us, at first it was intimidating because now what happened is that we called around 30 estate agents before we bought our first property. So now it was about that relationship building between us and the estate agent. I think this is one of the most important things that do happen in property investing, that you need to have that relationship between yourself and the estate agent. Because now if the estate agent doesn't really want to work with you, they won't actually make life easier for you to actually get the particular deal. So now it's about having that relationship between yourself and the estate agent, seeing where can you guys actually meet together. And then if it does happen, say for instance, if you were to buy the property at 1.3 and you wouldn't make a profit, right? Do not be afraid to withdraw from the particular deal, right? Because now I feel like a lot of people feel like I'm obligated now because I have the relationship with the estate agent. I'm now obligated that I need to buy this property, right? If the price doesn't actually work for you, just pull back away from the deal and tell the estate agent that if you do not have any buyers, please do contact me because I'm actually willing to buy at this price point.
Neo, do you have anything to add there?
Awesome. I was just really saying what he's saying. Like, we speak the same language, so whatever that he was saying, I was also because that's what we always do. You don't just, if like both of you guys don't agree on that price, we just leave the price. That, guys, this is the amount that I'm willing to actually give out. If that person is willing to come through, my desk is open until this point. Let's say we give them a week or two so that they can think about it in that time. Because also we're running it as a business. We can't be waiting pending offer until.
And you know, I actually like what the Nong brothers are pointing out. That first one is going in with an expert. So in the event where they're buying distressed properties and perhaps even want to flip them, you're going in with a contractor who's going to give you a sense of how much work is going to be needed. In the event where you obviously you're not going to be flipping the property, you also might want to go in with somebody who is more familiar with the property space. And of course, then the second one, which is something that maybe people sometimes underplay, is shopping around. I mean, you're saying that you spoke to 30 different estate agents or viewed almost 30 different properties. And that's such an important one, right? Because when you're buying for the first time, you might see that first property and you might think, oh, wow, I'm in love. This is the one that I want. They're asking for 800,000. I qualify for 800,000. I can afford this. We're good to go. But then the moment you start viewing other properties in other, or in similar areas, because obviously when you're buying that first property, there are certain areas that you're targeting because you want to be living there. But you're certainly, targeting different estates or complexes within the areas that you're interested in. Then you find a property or properties with the very same specs, but that are maybe now going for 680 and 700. And you realize that actually, maybe that first one wasn't such a big deal. And that maybe it might actually be overpriced. So shopping around and viewing quite a number of properties becomes so important, and even shortlisting. So going back for another viewing, don't feel as though you need to view it just once and that's it. You can get access again, view it again. Because I think it's one of those, it's a process. So don't think you must go in once and then that's it. One of the questions that we've gotten in, gents, is a cost that, of course, a lot of people aren't mindful of because they might know, but they might not know about it. And it's a question that comes in from Udumisani Mijiezi Senior, who says, evening guys, I once read that any property under $1 million no longer carries transfer costs. Is it true? And is it effective now or not?
Oh, yes. No, That's true. That's true. I mean, and we should always be mindful for it. What I like about, in terms of looking at it from property investing, is that we have to be mindful of all of these costs that are actually going to come through, and we're going to see how much is our return on investment from the onset. So if we do not actually take in such, that's true. What you mentioned is true. If you don't actually take into your numbers, you might run you might run into a problem, because at the end of the day, if my return on investment is something like 15% and I didn't take into consideration the transfer duties or other costs that I find myself in, that might actually make my return on investment be something like maybe lower than what I would be getting from the bank. And looking at property investing as a business, what's important is that I need to be thinking about the next step. When I'm going to apply to the bank, how are they going to look at me? How are they going to look at my expenses versus my income? How am I actually going to present this as a business? You have to capture it correctly. So what you mentioned right there is true, actually. And we always need to be updated with any changes. For instance, it just changed recently. So now if we're not aligned with laws and how transfer duties and the numbers regarding to that is actually changing or not, you can actually be surprised and get that call that, hey man, you need to be paying so much on transfer duty and you're not aware of.
And can I?
And you know, oh yes, Lebo?
Just clarify something to the viewers. There is transfer costs and there's also
duty. Yes.
So now, please do not say that those guys said I'm not going to pay transfer costs. There's transfer costs that you actually have to pay when you buy a property, and then there's transfer duties, is the tax that you actually pay if the house is above 1 million. So now that's the thing that I wanted to clarify, because when we were running the numbers with another client, the client was like, the house is at 800,000. So now, why am I paying transfer costs? But now there's transfer costs and there's also transfer duty. So now the transfer duty is the one that you don't pay if the house is actually below 1 million.
Yeah, and I actually wanted to also make that distinction there for Dumisani, that the transfer cost, there's no running away from it. You are paying the lawyers. There's just no running away from it. Budget for it. There are different creative ways that different financial institutions try to ease certainly the bond registration amount. Some of them might give you a certain discount. If you are a particular type of client, they typically don't absorb it into the bond facility itself. So you actually have to budget for it. And you're able to, I think one of the cost saving ways is certainly you're able to negotiate with the attorneys to give you a discount, and you can negotiate with both the transferring attorneys as well as the bond registration attorneys to give you that discount. And we've certainly had different conversations, with different attorneys who say, look, you're certainly able to negotiate for a slightly, reduced rate, but it's a cost that you're not going to run away from. Transfer duty, on the other hand, there are ways that you won't pay for it, because if your property, as Lebo says, is below that R1 million threshold, then you don't qualify. In the event where it is above, you're going to have to pay SARS. One of those things that we can't avoid in life is taxes and debt. So you're going to have to pay SARS, and the transaction won't go through until that transfer duty has been paid. So you also can, of course, go to privateproperty.co.za and put in the data. There's a calculator that's able to help you get a sense of if there's going to be a transfer duty, how much is it going to be. Transfer duty is typically on a sliding scale. So if, for example, it's 1.2, you'll find that the transfer duty is relatively low relative to, for example, a property that is 3 million rands. So not everybody is within that same bracket. So it's always useful for you to run those numbers and factor them in. So even right now, when you're thinking of sort of saving the money for that first property. Lebo, now, before I let you go, any final tips that you'd like to share with our viewers who are going to be first-time home buyers, especially when it comes to, the costs that are associated with buying a property for the first time?
I mean, for me, based on our conversations, I'm reflecting while we're still speaking, it's that negotiation kept on coming through every time. So our viewers should be those customers, those customers that are always asking, can I get a discount for this? Is this thing possible? Can I actually decrease this? So you should be rather proactive towards buying than reactive. When I get my offer to purchase, I mustn't just get and sign. I must be proactive. Can I add this? Can I minus this? When I get this thing from my bond originator, I need to be proactive towards buying property than reactive. That's for me.
I mean, just to add on what Neo was saying, is that negotiation is the one, it's the key player when it comes to buying a property and actually getting the most discounts within the market. So now, as you've seen that with transfer costs, you can actually negotiate it down. With your deals in terms of your bank, the credit that is actually offered to you, that could also be negotiated. The price at which you're actually going to buy the particular property can be actually negotiated. But now, one thing I'd like to stress is that the viewers should always take a professional with them throughout the process. So now, when you're looking at the example that we have actually talked about in terms of buying the property and going with the contractor, please go with the contractor that knows their work, right? Because I know sometimes what happens most of the time is that we take someone from the streets and we're like, I see you that you can actually work good. So now, can you please come through with me? Because now that's one of the mistakes that we actually went through, right? We went with another contractor and they had their hands in the pockets and they were looking around, telling us to take pictures around of the wrong things. But now, at the end of the day, when we asked him that how much would it cost, he was like, around 100,000. So now, if you were to break down the 100,000, how would he use the 100,000? He won't be able to do that. So now, please do take a professional with you so that they can actually list down what are you going to spend and where are you actually going to spend it.
And that's such an important one. Gents, we're going to leave it there this evening. Thank you so much for joining us.
Okay. Sure. Thank you. Thank you to your viewers.
And that is Lebo Nong as well as Neo Nong, the Nong brothers. They're co-founders of Nong Wealth. You can get their contact details right here below if you're watching us on Facebook or Twitter, or YouTube. We have posted the link to Nong Wealth if you want to get in touch with them. That, of course, brings us to the end of the Private Property Podcast. It's also, of course, the end of our episodes for the week. You can, of course, go onto our YouTube channel as well as our Facebook page if you want to catch up on some of the great conversations that we've had throughout the week. But we're not leaving you with nothing. You can, of course, catch Chad over the weekend on the property show. So I do hope that you enjoy some of the country's best estates and what they have on offer. Until then, folks, I do hope that you're having a great weekend. Of course, staying home and staying safe. I'll be back again tomorrow, or rather not even tomorrow, I'll be back again on Monday, right here on the Private Property Podcast at 7 o'clock. Until then, stay safe.
Hi, I'm Nicoline Terblanche and I'm part of the SA Women's Hockey team. And I'm the technical director of Tax Hockey. And I'm also the assistant coach for the first team ladies. I moved to Ferry Glen about 5 years ago. Ferry Glen is a really safe place and the people are really kind. Some of my friends live very close by in suburbs like Equestria and Olympus. In the morning I will wake up, make myself a cup of coffee, go for a jog in the Ferry Glen Nature Reserve, or even just in the neighborhood. It's safe, quiet, and the environment is really nice. I love Ferry Glen because I'm near the city, but I'm not in the city. I like to go to Pretoria Country Club to clear my mind, on my own, to relax and just to enjoy a round of golf. In Pretoria East we really have nice places to visit like Menlyn Mall and Brooklyn Mall that is really close by. There are also a lot of top schools in the area like Pretoria Boys High and Hoërskool Menlo Park. One of the most beautiful places to see the whole of Pretoria is the Fort Kapperkop viewpoint. And that's my neighborhood.